Hello, everybody. First off, I'm Adam Lichter. I'm the athletic director at St. Mary's High School in Stockton. This is an honor for me to introduce, they call her Mama Shelly there, Shelly Mullenix. She is the Senior Associate AD of Health and Wellness at the LSU, not just LSU, the LSU. She holds degrees in health education, athletic administration, and social work. She has over 25 years of practical experience as a certified athletic trainer, ATC, at the Collegiate National Championship program level. She'll speak more about herself. This is more of an honor for me in the sense of I talked to Leo, and we all know Leo over at De La Salle, who is the president of the CNAA, and he kind of rekindled our relationship with me and Shelly. She's my cousin. She is my second cousin. So it's pretty awesome to kind of rekindle that relationship, and hopefully we'll continue that relationship through on our, the rest of our lives. So further ado, Shelly, go ahead. Everybody's here for you.
Great. Thank you so much, Adam. And it's a pleasure to speak to you all as well. I know it's a lot earlier there for you than it is for me. We're at the 10 o'clock mark in Baton Rouge. So hope you all have your coffee and you're ready to roll. The talk is really kind of a general talk. I think I tried to kind of narrow it into the areas I thought would be most interesting for you all. But essentially, talking about the balance of safety and mental health in athletics. We discussed obviously the different levels, whether we're at middle school, junior high school, or high school or college. And the truth is that even as an athletic trainer in my high school in North Miami Beach, Florida, I was doing a lot of the same stuff. I mean, I seem to always have gravitated towards the need to help people. And so, while for the athletic trainers that are on here, while you're taping, you're talking and, developing those relationships. So this method has been kind of fine-tuned, as Adam said, over the last 25 years here at LSU, but we can't forget my time at Florida State, which was another 10 or 11 years of my life where I started my career. So we'll talk a little bit about the multidisciplinary approach to managing this, and hopefully you can apply it to whatever level that you're working with your student athletes in.
Shelly, I do want to mention that this is recorded and posted down the line. So anything Shelly talks about, we like to pluck at least one or two good things from everybody. So it will be recorded. So you'll see the recording up there. If you have anything in the chat, I'm going to look at the chat as Shelly's co-host. If it's pressing, I will bring it up to Shelly and kind of interject. If it's not, we'll probably have about 5 or 10 minutes, but we have another meeting obviously after this. But it is recording. So go ahead and put anything in the chat and I will bring it up if it's pressing. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So just to give you a little bit of background history, Adam mentioned a little bit, but I think it's important to kind of know where I've come from and maybe the experiences that I had, just so that you can understand where I got to today. Essentially, my undergraduate and my first master's were at Florida State University. So not too far from home. I was able to, obviously go back and forth, connect with my family in the time that I was there. But really, once I started into my master's program, I was there, 24/7. Athletic trainers obviously are working, nonstop, so we don't really have much vacation time. But essentially, got my health education undergraduate degree there. At the time, they didn't really have athletic training curriculum, so we were able to get a concentration in athletic training, is what they called it. So enough courses to have us be able to sit for our national board exam and acquire that certification. After that, when I was going through my graduate assistantship and working specifically with volleyball as my main sport, I was acquiring the Master's of Science in Athletic Administration. Clearly, I would have never really thought that at the end of the day, I would be working in administration. I saw myself as a lifetime athletic trainer, but some good fortunes have come along the way and been able to move myself into administrative levels. But, there wasn't a day that I didn't use my athletic administration knowledge as an athletic trainer. I think that anyone in this business is really using all those skills all the time in order to maneuver, whether it's parents or coaches or doctors or other administrators. My first job was at Florida State University as an assistant athletic trainer. I worked again, primarily volleyball. So they moved me from a graduate assistantship into a staff position. And my only claim to fame at Florida State was that in '93 for their national championship, I worked there 2 days. So we're pretty sure that the 2 weeks that I spent there at Florida State was what kicked it off. So was there for about 11 years total. And then with the good fortune, again, my colleague, Jack Marucci, and his assistant, Andy Barker, came over to Louisiana State University. And so I started over here January of 1997 and was just a hardworking athletic trainer for the majority of the time. But sometime in the last 5 years, I really saw the kids changing. I saw the world changing and figured that if I want to really hone in my skills and really do more for them than what I was doing just as being Mama Shelly, that I need to really get some credentials behind that. And so I, went to school part-time, took about 4.5 years to go through, and ended up actually just sitting for those board exams about a month ago. So I've got the ability now to actually do formal counseling, serving as a social worker, which is, in my opinion, a really crucial job, skill set, whatever you want to call it, to have when you're working with young athletes and, again, their parents. So the bulk of the time here, like I mentioned, I was the senior associate athletic trainer. It wasn't until this past year that I was promoted into the senior associate athletic director of health and wellness. Ironically, right, COVID comes, and so it made the athletic director look brilliant in bringing on someone who had some credentials in the medical background, medical field, as well as the mental health field, because this has been a challenge. I think everyone can relate to the challenge that it's been. So while most of my days have been hard and fun, they have been certainly from the school of hard knocks. And I say that because I think about the people that I've worked for, and they're quite the characters. So I, again, don't know how much you would follow LSU necessarily from that side of the planet and the country, that sort of thing. I know you're all kind of all over this country right now, but these are essentially the four guys that I worked with. Jerry DiNardo, whose wife was an athletic trainer. So I think getting in at that time with him was actually a nice fit. And then comes Coach Saban shortly after. So I really only had DiNardo here for about 2 years before he was let go. And Coach Saban came in, and he is everything that people think he is. I mean, all the good and the bad. But the one thing that I would say is that he had real specific philosophies behind what he was doing. And I think that that's important when you're acting as an administrator and you're hiring people to know, what else does this person bring? What are these intangibles? Because if you're just bringing in someone to win, there's bound to be some problems with that. You need to have a balance of someone who understands, how to work people, how to talk to people, how to communicate to parents, how to manage people's mental health. Do they really take concussions seriously? All these things that we talk about in terms of health and safety of our student athletes, they do in a lot of ways rest in the hands of the head coach at the collegiate level. So you really want to make sure that you have, the right relationships there going, and understand those philosophies when those coaches come in, no matter what sport you're working. Because at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself as an athletic trainer, who's really in charge? I mean, I can make those calls about the concussion protocol, but if you're at a college where the coach doesn't like the call that you make, you get replaced. So when it comes to an athletic administrator and ADs and that sort of thing, it's a very difficult job. It shouldn't be this difficult. It should be that you stand by kind of morals and ethics and health and safety. But, at the end of the day, as we've learned through COVID, at least here at LSU, football pays the bills, right? And so if you don't have football up and running and winning, you don't really have, an athletic department. So making sure that you've got the right people in charge, you understand what their roles are, they understand what their roles are, and that you understand what they believe in and what they stand behind. Because really, Coach Saban came in with this background in psychology he was already using in Michigan State. In transitioning over to Coach Miles, he was all for it too. I mean, he's a pretty cerebral guy and definitely more quirky than Coach Saban. But he let us continue to use our multidisciplinary approach, focusing on mental health, focusing on drug education, drug treatment, focusing on the academic, the importance of academics in our setting, especially, again, working with student athletes that primarily are coming from, if not the lowest state in terms of education and prosperity, the second lowest state, right? I mean, our areas are pulling from Texas, Mississippi, Louisiana, generally speaking. So, and then again, moving forward into Coach O, the guy behind him, I would say it's probably worth noting. It's an interesting looking at these pictures now. The guy behind Coach Miles there is Matt Flynn, our quarterback as well. Your quarterbacks in this setting are the leaders, and they set the tone. And a lot of times, if you got the right quarterback in position there, those head coaches don't have a whole lot of relevance. Joe was a really good example of leading the troops, and really Coach O being able to kind of sit back and let it happen. So again, mostly just to understand who your ADs are, what they're bringing, what they're bringing to the table, and deciding that that's what's going to be, the direction that you're going to go, because it's going to be hard to influence them some other way. They are very obviously set in their ways. I thought it was important to probably talk a little bit about, the student that you're dealing with and the age group that they're dealing with. When you're trying to understand someone's mental health, someone's motives, that sort of thing, I think it's important to know a little bit about how their brain is working, and to recognize, and again, I'm sure you guys do, that athletics is really, this pivotal time for these kids. Students that are at the college level, the ones that I'm working with, I mean, majority of these guys are changing the trajectories of their life by their involvement in sport, because they are, again, coming from lots of poverty, single family homes. Again, this may be the situation that a lot of you all find your student athletes in as well. So even more important for us to really understand these kids, where they're coming from, so we can help them through this portion of their life, because this is a very troubling time for these students in general. I mean, then we can add in social media and COVID and everything else and isolation. It really is a troubling time. But real briefly, we'll go into this early adolescence, that 10 to 13 year age group is a lot about just kind of growth in size more than anything else. Their bodies are changing. They really are starting to assert their independence. You get some rebel without a cause in there too. Some of them like to push the limits a little bit in terms of behavior. They tend to be a little bit self-centered, and things are pretty concrete. They're either black and white. They're not particularly deep thinking at that age. There's obviously outliers. I've got 2 children, 2 girls. They were old before they were even young. My kids were thinking pretty deep thoughts, but the average kid is just really pretty concrete at that time frame. In middle adolescence time frame, again, 14 to 17 years old, that frontal lobe, which is the executive functioning, it's the one that helps us make all of our good judgments and good decisions, is really still not fully formed. It's still in the works. It's still connecting. It's still going through its wiring phase, and it's very influential at this point. It responds to what it is brought up around. So these kids are starting to make some better complex decisions. They tend to really respond still with impulse and lack of judgment, but they are able to regulate a little bit more at this time frame. And they certainly understand consequences. You could know that if you've ever punished your children or punished your student athlete and given them consequences. They don't like that. They understand what consequences are, which is, again, even more of a reason to have that part of the puzzle here. But often driven by emotion, right? Like, they feel love at this point, but they feel it really, really hard, love. They feel sadness really, really strongly. And so if they don't have those good supports in this time frame, it really does set them up for struggles beyond that, because they don't have ways to regulate their behaviors, their responses. They end up not being as resilient. So it is important in these time frames before they get to college to really be addressing these issues and paying attention to them. And then I get them at late adolescence. I could tell you their frontal lobes are still not there. They still have some growth. But the science tends to say around 24, 25 years old is when that frontal lobe is fully developed. And so, we are talking about risk taking, obviously here, impulse issues, especially if we have diagnostic problems like ADHD, and depression and anxiety. Those are all things that we have a huge number of athletes coming in to college with at this point. And not only athletes, obviously, but just students on campus. Their independence is increased because they're separated from their parents. And so they're going to test those boundaries again. They're going to test it, with their coach. They're going to test it with their athletic trainers, with their friends. And so it's real, again, important to have some of those structures in place to be able to discipline that and kind of mold that and form it. And their values and beliefs are solidified, which is the part that, I really kind of try to focus a lot on, because I'm much more about what happens when they leave me, not when they're here. Like when they're here, I'm trying to fight for their life and to mold them in a way. But I know that what I do with them in their 4 years of college basically solidifies who they're going to be later on. So I find that part being most interesting. And so ultimately, this is the balance, right? We're trying to figure out the balance between the safety and the health of the individuals as they're engaged in their sport and their other activities with athletics. We expect, guts and glory. This is kind of part of what drives us to be champions and to want to come back the next day after we have a big loss. How far are we really willing to push this health and safety is really always what's in question. If you're an athletic trainer, if you're an athletic administrator, you see these things going on all the time. Coaches are really kind of paid to just plow forward. The really good ones do focus on the balance here, but it's something that has to be at the forefront of what you're doing as you're moving through your program, identifying who those stakeholders are in these decisions. So it's not just the coach and the coach's program. You've got obviously kids, you've got parents, if you're talking about junior high school and high school levels that you're answering to. And in some cases, you may have kids that are in foster care. You may not even have kids that even think the people they live with are their parents. You're dealing with coaches, again, all those different personalities that you're trying to kind of corral, not to mention their assistant coaches, which typically have a lot of influence as well. You'll have doctors in the middle of the mix making health and safety calls that maybe not everyone agrees with. When I think about those, I do think about concussions and that there's certain protocols to follow. The other side of the coin with those concussion protocols is someone saying you need to suck it up. You just had your bell rung. You have no idea what we used to do when we used to play in our leather helmets. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that, that these kids, you don't have to say it, it gets reinforced just by the actions of the sports themselves. And then ultimately administrators, because as an administrator, it's your job to really protect the whole organization. And you can't get caught up in really the guts and glory of it for very long, because you're going to end up turning a blind eye to the health and safety. And that's a real big problem. So the one thing that I really like is focusing when I'm meeting these kids, learning these kids and their families, is what they call the social determinants of health. So these are the things that really kind of have molded them to where they are and will continue to mold them through their college years into where they're going to be. And quite frankly, again, I'm thinking about where they're going to be as parents. And so anything I do, I always think I'm interacting with them so that when they have children of their own, that they will be able to pass on, these skills of management in their household. I think it's very important. But the truth is that there's a number of barriers that we face in terms of safety and a positive mental health for these kids. And so this is just basically a chart, and everyone's going to have different areas that they may find more comfortable to talk about. I really like talking about all these things as a social worker. It was again a pretty obvious fit for me. I was never just an athletic trainer. I was never just worried about someone's knee or someone's ankle. I was worried about what they were doing with their scholarship checks. I was worried about, how they got home at night. This is not, atypical, I'm sure, for administrators as well, but it's important as a social worker that we look at the entire family system and how they're interacting in it so that we make sure that they don't fall through these cracks. And so I see it in a chart. Some people will see this as a spider web and all the people that are kind of a part of this spider web that kind of keep them from falling through the loops. But some things that I think about, just to kind of point out our scenarios here at this level, obviously when we talk about financial, we're talking about someone's income. So not only the income or lack thereof at home, these kids are here on scholarships. Most of my kids would not be here in college if it weren't for their athletic ability, because they often come from single parent households. and single parent households that don't necessarily have big income coming in. LSU is fortunate enough, obviously up until this COVID time, where as long as we have football games, we have fairly good amount of money that we can actually dispense back out, right? So our expenses to them help cover their expenses. So they don't have a lot of expenses. They're living in really nice dormitories here, apartments that were far nicer than even my own home growing up as a child. Their food's provided for them. Their books are provided for them. There's paper, there's tutors, there's all that. So there's not a lot of expense. The frustrating part that you'll find is that, you know, like most kids, they always need this extra pair of shoes. So we can give them 10 pairs of shoes, but if it's not the pair of shoes that they want, they're going to go out and spend money on that. So those are things that they have access to that they maybe didn't have in the past. So teaching them those financial skills are real important as part of their just mental health and upbringing. Again, not that many bills, but if they move off campus after their sophomore, junior years, all of a sudden they're having to pay rent, pay bills, and that's something they've never had. They've never had to deal with that because most parents aren't really sharing that information with their children. And so, and we don't teach it, of course, in high school, junior high school anymore. They don't really have home economics like they used to have. So those things aren't really getting taught. And then who's actually supporting them? The concerns we have financially are, you know, boosters. We don't really want boosters supporting them. That's a violation, and they'll lose eligibility if they've got boosters that are actually getting engaged. So, you know, helping them understand that and the implications of getting involved with a booster that way, that the impacts that can have are obviously pretty long lasting. We have to think about the physical health of our student athletes as well. So we wonder, you know, housing, especially when they're off campus, where are they living? Are they living in an area that's not particularly safe because they're trying to save their money? Or maybe their money goes home. We have a number of student athletes where the entire check goes directly to their parents' accounts, so they don't get anything. And while that's admirable that they are taking care of their families, you can understand the pressure and the stress that adds on them when they have to still be able to pay their own bills and sometimes buy food and you know, have any kind of social life. Those things cost money. But we worry about, you know, their physical safety in terms of their housing. Their transportation is another issue. I don't really like in my town here in the area that we are in to be out really after 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock. And we spend a lot of time talking about what it is to be African American here. We have a huge proportion of our team, probably in the 80% point at this point. And it's a risk to be, you know, an African American right now, and it's a risk to be that in Baton Rouge. We just actually had, and my guess is you're not following us again on social media, but we just had an incident 2 nights ago with local police officers who, you know, I don't know what it will be called in the end, but, you know, at minimum profiled and got kind of rough with one of our football players. And he ended up having to pull out the fact that he was a football player to get their hands off of him. That's a scary thing, you know, in a town that you call home. And those are the things, again, that when our students leave us, they're walking home, they're riding their bicycles home from school. You know, you got to think about where they go through and what that creates in their own mind in terms of their mental health. Again, mentioned the safety and facilities. I thought that was really interesting. You know, one of the reasons I think for our success last year was the opening of our parts of our football facility, one of which was a locker room that actually had pods. And so no longer was it the stand-up locker room. It was actually a bed. These were actually a design that we created on our own in the athletic training room, that we're going to move a chair, essentially a cushion chair, into a bed. Because the truth is that in collegiate athletics, they spend a lot of time in the classroom and in the facilities, in the football facility. They don't need, this is the same thing for basketball. We don't see it in every sport, but we do see a lot of this in football and basketball. And so we actually made our facilities to accommodate them to be able to come here and nap, because we understood the value of sleep. So when there's no sleep going on, their ability to be able to focus in the classroom, focus on the field, on the courts, is diminished greatly. And so we had, again, the fortunate ability to be able to have enough donations to build a facility that was going to allow them to be able to nap in a safe place. We had student athletes, despite the fact that where they were living was a super safe area, literally right across the street from where I am. We're in a safe spot right now, that would have chosen to sleep in the locker room because the food was there, the showers were there, They had a locker space there. Their weight room was there. It was really everything they needed. And so to make those facilities feel like home was something that was really important to promoting their positive mental health. Education is a huge challenge for us. They don't come from good backgrounds. They're pushed through the school systems, whether they can read or not. It's really one of the more humbling parts of my job, sad parts of my job, to see some of the kids that are just incredibly functional, can interact and have learned how to interact with adults because it was really a survival skill, but they were never expected to read. They were never expected to do math. And then they were never evaluated for disorders. So some of them have learning disorders. Many of them do. Many of them have ADHD. Many of them have unresolved anxiety and depression from living in environments that are very stressful. So, is your school a place where they can do these diagnostic evaluations? Because if it's not, then the expectation is that the family has to burden the cost of this. And we're talking about doing, tests that cost about $1,700, $1,800 per kid for a full diagnostic academic evaluation. And that's a problem because if it goes unrecognized, it just perpetuates the problem that they really never get out of that cycle, having not been able to read, having been a failure in the classroom, and for some even a failure in sports, because as they get into the Division I, Division II, and III levels, it's complicated. This isn't just me hitting a layup. There's obviously there's skills going on in terms of laying out offense and defenses, and if they're not helped through that process of education, they really do struggle. Dietary, one of the highlights of my job is watching them grow. Watching these little squirmy bodies when they come here as recruits, like tiny guys that just blossom into this just extraordinary specimen. They don't do that just by growing up. They do that with good food. So you have to wonder where they're getting their food, and they're not getting it when they're living on food deserts, and they're shopping at the Dollar General store, whether because there's poverty issues or there's issues that are just related to where they're living and they don't have access. It's amazing the difference when you start giving them food and giving them quality food. And not only that, but giving them the registered dietitians at our level that can hone in on where they lack. One thing that's worth commenting on is we do a lot of lab work as part of our healthcare, our physicals. A lot of our student athletes, again, especially African Americans, are low vitamin D. Low vitamin D has a whole lot of correlation to depression. They have now correlated it to high rates of injury. It's related right now to your ability to actually manage COVID virus. So that's all related to the food that they can eat. So you can imagine if they're not getting regular food and they don't have access, maybe even these COVID periods, to those free lunches that they were getting in high school, that it's a problem. But one of the things I enjoyed doing last year, again, when we talk about food and comfort, my first thought is macaroni and cheese. I don't know what yours is, but these guys are coming from, if they're from Louisiana, even if they're poor, they're coming from some really, really good food. When they come to our campus, if we just want to feed them the things that we perceive are just healthy, we're missing out on a whole level of mental health, which is the comfort food. Making them feel at home. How can they stay connected to what they really love most, which is home, while they're here with us? And so we did this taste of home. So basically every senior or junior, depending if they were leaving out early for the league, for the NFL, we would actually get their parents' recipes, so their favorite recipes, and then we'd contact the parents, and our chef was actually preparing meals. So we'd have one night that was a luau, for instance. And so Braden Fajoko, who's from Salt Lake City, Utah, we had 3 Samoans at the time. We had an unbelievable feast. So for us, it was food we'd never had. For them, it was comfort, and it was bringing them home, basically, in their hearts and in their minds to what they love. And it's pretty homesick when you're far away from home. And so we don't want to also miss out on the benefits, really, at this level at least, and making sure that they have things that are familiar to them in terms of those comfort foods. Community is another area that I want to focus on, how well they're actually socially integrating. Again, the culture of Louisiana is so unique. when you come from California, when you come from Salt Lake City, you're coming to a different planet. I mean, if you've ever been down to New Orleans, this is a special place. And so you want to make sure that they are somehow making these connections, even though it's not going to feel like home to them. And that takes effort. And those are the things you can't just assume that they're going to feel like they're part of a home because they're here with the LSU Tigers now. It doesn't work that way anymore. They have to really feel connected. Part of that connectiveness is the issue of social justice right now. They have to feel supported. If they don't feel supported, then how are they supposed to really maneuver and work through, the importance of getting through a day, whether it's in school or in sport, without knowing that there are people that are going to have their back and be behind them? Creates a lot of stress. So acknowledging the stress before they get here, that it's completely normal, and that we have ways to manage that stress, I think are important, which really falls into the community support part. We have a really robust mental health program here. It's an important part of what we do at every level. You have to be healthy to go. You have to be unhealthy to go. There's no discrepancies. We're not waiting until you are at the rock bottom before we introduce you to our counselors, because then it creates a stigma behind it. And there should be no stigma in this area of mental health. So that's part of the community support. The opposite of that is that we've got some pretty brutal fans, right? And these guys and girls are on their social media platforms all the time. And man, the stuff that gets said, if we've lived 4 years, whichever side of the aisle you're on, it's gotten really, really rough. And so you can't also ignore that you might be sending praise to these kids, but they're hearing a completely different story about themselves if they're on their social media platform. And we have to be able to talk about that as well. Healthcare, I think, goes without saying, the better the healthcare, the more solidified they will be in terms of their health and safety. But the one thing I really thought was important here was the cultural competence. Again, I'm talking a lot about working with African Americans here. I can't have a bunch of just white middle-aged men working with them. I need to really diversify my group because there's just not a lot of trust, which you see is one of those factors there. So it could be the best doctor in the world, but if they don't have that connection to them culturally, it's a challenge. And so we went out of our way, and it wasn't hard, obviously, just being in the state to find what we wanted. But we've got just, a rainbow of everything from counselors to physicians, to surgeons, just to really help them feel like they are part of something that they can relate to and that they can trust. So real important concepts on here. Again, you could take kind of what you want from it, but as a social worker, like I mentioned, I really kind of cover all those areas. Getting a little bit closer to the issues of safety concerns and how you can see how they pan out over time. I just put up some of the pictures that I think about when I think back of my past and kind of where I've been. Josh Williford is in the top corner there, the giant offensive lineman who just got really blindsided in a game against University of Florida, and he was knocked out. And really the concussion that he had in that game was really the eventual reason why he had to leave the sport. So he really never completely recovered from that. I put that up here because there are policies and procedures that are in place. So as athletic directors, athletic trainers, you have to have these policies and they have to be followed. Very easily could have put Josh back out there if Josh, and he was really willing and wanting to play. But at some point, you have to say what is best for your student athlete. And concussion is one of those areas that's a real struggle for a lot of people. My dear friend Tyron Matthew, who I adore, was a nightmare when he was here. Now I want you to know, and it's probably not necessarily complete public knowledge, but Tyron donated $1 million to our facility here after he was kicked out of our university, out of our program, in thanks to what we had done for him in terms of giving him the support so that he ended up where he ended up. So when I think of all the tough times that I have when I interact with student athletes with policies and procedures about drugs and that sort of thing and mental health, I know that what we do now when they're young is molding them for the future, and that one day they do come around. I can go on and on about Tyron, but I'll kind of leave that there. Injuries, I put just the bottom picture there. The trajectory of one's career when they get hurt is a major factor in someone's mental health. And so making sure, again, that they have the best equipment, that they're, that we provide them the best braces, that we give them the best physicians, that we can provide the best surgery so that we can address these issues that would maybe be life-threatening injuries or career-ending injuries. We've got to do that because it obviously has a direct impact on where they end up in the future. For a basketball standpoint, this is a picture. I look at his face. It's a young Wade Sims, but Wade was killed here in Baton Rouge. It's probably been at least 2 years at this point. Really not doing much anything wrong. It was whether random or deliberate. It's the stuff that we have to deal with at this level. You have to deal with it as well if you're in the high school level. What's the response going to look like when you lose a student athlete? Whether it is to a murder or beneath him, Tyler Edwards, to a suicide. So these are all kids that I've interacted with very closely. I'm motivated by everyone on this screen. It every day pushes me to do the right thing and do things for all of our student athletes, and looking out for their safety because of the impacts that has really on their long-term mental health. And last thing is really kind of talking about the multidisciplinary team. Everyone's puzzle here will look a little bit different, but this is basically how ours looks, with the student athlete being in the center, our focus of attention, and all the people that really are a part of helping them maneuver this time frame. In no particular order, obviously, athletic trainers are a critical part to the puzzle. They have such a wide range of expertise. They've got the gift of gab oftentimes, and they can communicate with parents, with physicians, with the administrators. But the skill set that they have to manage medical, crisis is incredible. The academic counselors, again, are really, really important. So I know that in high schools, a lot of them are also built into those systems, whether they look like a social worker or a true academic tutor, that type of thing. Some kids are going to relate more to the academic tutor. They're going to trust them for whatever reason, right? If a kid doesn't trust me, I have to make sure that one of these people is being trusted. If it happens to be the academic person, that's great. At some point, me and the academic person then have to get together and have a meeting. So team physicians, administrators, drug prevention coordinators, the parent, and sports psych. In our setting here, we have basically a weekly meeting, our athletic department assistance program, and all these people, all these stakeholders are at the table, minus the student athlete majority of the time. There are times where we bring them in for conversation or intervention type things, but all these people have to talk. If these circles were actually silos, it would be a really bad scenario, because we can't operate in silos. We have to be able to have a free and open communication, because at the end of the day, if the academic person has something that is pending, maybe the academic person is the one who learned that their aunt just died of diabetic complications, and that academic person doesn't share that with the sports psych person, or doesn't share with the athletic trainer or the coach. What I tell you, so I of course left the coach off here, so no offense if there's a coach on here, but all those people have to communicate. If you can't communicate, there are going to be kids that are going to fall through the cracks. You're going to miss out on really addressing their overall health and safety, and that's ultimately what we're here for. We're here to project them onto the next, their trajectory onto the next phase of their life. That's really all I have in a nutshell, is how we manage it in this setting at the Division I level. I hope that all makes sense and that you have maybe some questions. I'm going to stop sharing at this point and get back to the screens. I see my cousin.
I'm here. Hey, so is there any questions for Shelly? I know there was nothing in the chat, so I didn't interject. You must have done a great job, Shelly, and a thorough job for no questions. But is there any questions for Shelly? If not, I'm gonna ask one, because I know they're being shy, but I know being this is the time of COVID. I wrote one down. How have you dealt with COVID at LSU? I know it's been different. It's different at the college level than at the high school level, but I'm definitely interested in how you dealt with COVID.
Yeah, it's been a challenge. We started on, so went down for us on March 11th, probably the same date for many people. March 12th, we were up and rolling. I was looking to August on March 12th. Someone had to be, because, you know, the whole thing would have folded otherwise. If you didn't have a plan in place to move forward to help manage and understand the virus, there was no way that we were going to open on a college campus. It's been an extraordinary effort for sure. I've put together, I guess the most important thing was just the educational components, understanding what we even were dealing with, right? Understanding the science of it, following it as closely as I can, removing the distractions, and really, at minimum, educating the parents and the kids and our coaches and that sort of thing, all through. So I started writing a newsletter. Basically, I did a newsletter. This newsletter went every single day. I mean, I was on adrenaline like nobody's business. And every day there was a new article. There was a Q&A section. I was talking about, again, so we're going to get crude a little bit. I knew I was addressing student athletes who are of age to have sex, and we know have sex, and there's coaches like, can you have sex during COVID? So I covered everything in the Q&A, from the Sesame Street features that they had through CNN to can you have sex safely? I think just addressing the potential questions that everyone would have had, really allowed them to kind of focus on a day, while others of us were focusing on advancing into what was really June for us, when the student athletes for football returned. All the COVID protocols, all the money that had to be spent on cameras, infrared cameras for temperature checking, and hand sanitizers and bracelets, so that we can make sure they've gone through checkpoints, spacing chairs out, buying the masks, buying gloves, educating coaches and people who just didn't think this thing was real. You have to spread out, you have to wear your mask. I mean, it is a constant, if I tell you, a constant challenge. And if you watched the news yesterday, you can appreciate the constant challenge, as we are right now in the middle of a flare up across the country. But we're playing Alabama on Saturday, and it's not looking real great right now in terms of our numbers. So it continues to be a problem that we kind of have to work with day by day.
So another question just came in. What triage advice do you have for high school sites where ADs without trainers need to apply the, you say it, okay, the approach?
Yeah. It's a huge problem. I don't know if that question's coming in from California, but a lot of states don't even have that as a law, that you have to have that medical care. I worry about it a lot, but we're here in the Serengeti. It gets to be 110 degrees here in the summertime, and we're running guys out there in the heat on an AstroTurf, where the turf we've actually measured as being 168 degrees at the time that they're training out there. I can't imagine being at any level of athletics and not having some safety protocols in place. So here you can get physical therapy clinics, so you can get medical care to come out. Those orthopedic surgeons usually have PAs that might want to come and cover those sports, because they of course benefit from then having the money come back to them in spades, right, in surgeries. But a nurse, PTs, and policies that are in place that they follow, it just is really, it's basic stuff. But there are a lot of really great athletic trainers out there. Again, I don't know if this is coming from California's question or not, but
yeah, it is.
Yeah, so it's a huge problem. It's a law that needs to change.
Yeah. Well, and we do it at St. Mary's too, just to piggyback. We have a doc who is a team doc, I call him, but he does it because he gets the surgeries. So
Right.
It would be smart to contact any doctor in your local community who's going to be making the money too. Plus they can kind of give back and help.
Right.
We do that at St. Mary's, and I think it's been really good. I have one more, and then I think we're going to have to be done, go to our next one. But how would you say is the best way to go for advocating for mental wellness program for our students, to both coaches and school admin? It's a great question.
Yeah, I mean, it goes to my social work. I cannot see a place without a social worker. Like, and back in the day in my head, social workers were the ones that took your kids from your home, right? That's not how it is anymore. It is not that. And so changing that stigma alone, and inserting for a salary, and sucking up a salary and putting it in there for a social worker to be on grounds, is going to save a life. I know it's going to save a life. I mean, there's no doubt about it. It will save a life. They work within families, they work within organizations, they understand these kids. If it's the right fit, they're a blessing. They're like the perfect school teacher you have. You always have that one or two really incredible teachers that just connect with everyone. That's what this social worker can do for you. But they're just there and they're present. They call me Mama Shelly because I was just there and present. It wasn't because I clearly didn't give birth to them. I was there for them when they needed me, when they had a question about anything, I was there. And that's really what those counselors serve. But the coaches have to allow them in, right? So they have to let them at practice so that their face is at practice and they understand that they're just an extension of the athletic department and the program. They've got to be part of that. They can't just be in the background and hidden, because mental health is nothing to hide. We all struggle with it. We all have to talk about it, and it just has to be part of our program.
Well, Shelly, you're awesome. Thank you so much. Obviously, the CNAA brought me and Shelly together. If you guys didn't know, Shelly's my cousin. And we haven't seen each other for, I think, Thanksgiving 20 years ago was the last time I saw Shelly. So I got to make a trip to LSU.
Yes, you do. All y'all come down here.
All right. Well, maybe we'll do a CNAA conference in LSU. That's what I was telling Leo. Well, thank you so much. And thanks everybody for showing up. And remember, this is recorded and it will be on our website. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Shelly.
Bye.